The night of factory bet everything on one model. The lights stayed on long after midnight, not for overtime, for survival. That night, failure was an option, because if this model failed, the factory would follow. To understand why one car carried so much weight, we need to rewind, back to a moment when margins vanished, when competition tightened relentlessly, and when a single decision could erase decades of history. The factory had been struggling quietly. Aging platforms, falling demand, rising costs. Every new model felt like a compromise. Safe, predictable, forgettable. Sales reflected that reality. Leadership knew the truth. Incremental change would not save them. Only reinvention could. So they made a dangerous choice. They consolidated everything. Resources, reputation, jobs, into one model. The weight of that consolidation was felt differently at every level of the organization. For executives, it was a strategic wager. For engineers, it was a creative mandate accompanied by uncommon pressure. For the workers on the factory floor, it was something more personal. Their livelihoods were attached to this decision in the most direct way possible. If the model succeeded, they worked. If it failed, the future became uncertain in ways that affected families, communities, and the identity of a place that had organized itself around the act of building cars for a generation. The single model strategy also carried a psychological dimension that shaped every decision that followed. When everything depends on one outcome, the relationship between the people involved and the work they're doing changes. Disagreements that might ordinarily be escalated are resolved faster. Compromises that would normally require weeks of negotiation are reached in hours. The clarity of the stakes eliminates ambiguity. Everyone knows what matters and why. That kind of focused organizational energy is rare, and the factory had it in those months in abundance. Not because of exceptional leadership, but because circumstances had made the choice simple. Survive or not, together or not. Engineers were given freedom and pressure in equal measure. Innovate boldly, but don't fail. Design teams worked in isolation. Prototypes were hidden from competitors. Leaks were punished. The factory transformed overnight. New tooling installed. Old processes abandoned. Training intensified. Quality checks multiplied. Every worker understood the stakes. This wasn't just a car. It was a verdict. Launch timeline shrank. Testing overlapped production. Risk was accepted openly, because waiting meant closure. As midnight approached on launch eve, final inspections continued relentlessly. Panels aligned. Software flashed. Engines cycled. Executives walked the floor in silence. No speeches. No reassurance. Everyone knew tomorrow decided everything. And when the sun finally rose, the model rolled out quietly. No celebration. No applause. Just a machine carrying the weight of an entire factory. And that weight was about to be tested by the world. The first deliveries felt unreal. No marketing spectacle. No grand reveal. Just keys changing hands. Early buyers weren't enthusiasts. They were loyalists. People who believed despite the silence. The car felt different immediately. Not flashy. Focused. Build quality surprised reviewers. Panel gaps were tight. Materials felt deliberate. Underneath, engineering choices told a story. Shared components minimized risk. New architecture maximized flexibility. Every decision balanced ambition with survival. Sales numbers arrived slowly, then steadied, then climbed, not explosively, reliably. Dealers reported something unusual. Customers recommended it unprompted. Word spread without campaigns. Inside the factory, tension eased slightly, but relief was cautious, because sustainability mattered more than launch success. The caution was earned and well-founded. Launch success in the automotive industry is a poor predictor of long-term viability. Many models have opened strongly and faded within 18 months when the initial wave of curiosity subsided and deeper issues surfaced. The factory had seen enough of those cycles to know that the real test came later, in the second year, in the warranty data, in the fleet renewals. The first delivery was not a finish line. It was the beginning of a much longer examination. The word-of-mouth growth that followed was particularly significant because it could not have been manufactured. Customers who recommend products unprompted do so because the product has earned it, because their expectations were not just met, but exceeded in ways that felt personal and worth sharing. That kind of organic advocacy is the most durable form of market momentum. It does not respond to budget cycles. It does not need to be renewed quarterly. It builds gradually and compounds, and the factory sales figures reflected exactly that kind of patient, compounding trust. Months passed. Warranty data stayed clean. Production defects declined. The model wasn't dominating headlines. It was dominating spreadsheets. Competitors noticed late. By the time they reacted, the car had established trust. That trust became momentum. But the real test came quietly. An economic downturn, rising material costs, shrinking consumer confidence. Sales across the industry fell. This model held, not because it was exciting, because it was dependable. Executives realized something unexpected. They hadn't built a miracle. They'd built resilience. And resilience doesn't announce itself. But the story wasn't finished, because betting everything on one model means living with that decision for years. And the consequences were still unfolding. As years passed, the gamble revealed its true shape. The model aged well, not dramatically. Reliably, facelifts were subtle. Updates focused on fundamentals. Nothing risked the core. That restraint paid off. Residual values held strong. Fleet contracts expanded. Global markets adopted the platform. The factory stabilized. Then grew. Jobs once considered temporary became permanent again. Apprentices returned. Training programs expanded. But dependency grew too. Every success traced back to this one model. Every forecast assumed its continuation. Every future plan leaned on its foundation. Engineers felt the pressure shift. Innovation slowed. Risk tolerance narrowed. Because once survival is secured, fear changes shape. Now the fear was losing stability. This shift in the nature of fear is one of the more subtle and important consequences of a successful gamble. Before, the factory feared failure. Failure was visible, fast, and catastrophic. But the new fear was different. It was a fear of disrupting something that was working, of introducing variables into a system that had finally found its equilibrium. This second kind of fear is harder to argue against because it feels rational. It is dressed in the language of prudence rather than timidity. And yet its effect, a narrowing of imagination, a preference for repetition over invention, is just as limiting as the paralysis that precedes collapse. Leadership debated diversification. New models were proposed, then delayed. Why disrupt what works? The factory had been saved, but it had also been defined. Competitors caught up technologically. Markets shifted again. Consumer expectations evolved. The model adapted carefully, but not boldly, and that raised a new question. Had the factory escaped collapse, only to trade urgency for comfort? Because betting everything once creates caution forever after. The same decision that saved them now constrained them, and recognizing that paradox was the next test, not of engineering, but of courage, because survival is only the first chapter. What comes after determines whether the bet was truly won. Eventually, the factory faced a familiar silence, not the panic of before, but the quiet question of what comes next. The model still sold well. Margins remained healthy. Stability held, but ambition had dulled. New ideas felt risky again, not because failure loomed, but because success had set expectations. The factory remembered the night it bet everything. The fear, the unity, the clarity, and it realized something uncomfortable. Pressure had once sharpened purpose. Now comfort softened it. Leadership made a choice, not another gamble, but a measured risk. New platforms were greenlit. Teams were encouraged to challenge assumptions. The model would remain important, but not alone, because resilience without evolution becomes stagnation. The factory survived by betting everything once. It endured by refusing to do it again. That balance became its real legacy, not the car itself, But the understanding that survival requires courage and growth requires it twice. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The night of